Well, a little change of pace, particularly as the folks who have to get the plane out this afternoon head for the door. But this is an opportunity to actually look. Crown-of-thorns, there will be a Thorns Starfish session tomorrow, and most of the things I'm going to be talking about will be spoken about in detail. But this is just a bit of an oversight and a bit of a change of pace. Clearly, now's the time we need to be thinking outside the box. We need to be thinking about other ways of doing things. And this is a little story about how that's actually worked before. Now, we've all seen this, many challenges, all there. I noticed that shipping, oil spills and biosecurity breaches, and that haven't been mentioned to date, so I'll throw those up there. Loss of coastal wetlands, coastal development and dredging. All of it has to be done in the face of climate change. So as Dave said earlier, the things that we're doing now we have to do more of to build the resilience. So we'll just skip through that. Just for those who don't know this region so well, particularly some of our international visitors, historically the size of the reef, and we know it's big, and relatively small and affluent Queensland population has provided the protection. Most of Queensland hasn't had to rape and pillage the reef to stay alive. So that's given us opportunities around tourism, it's given us opportunities that some of other, particularly tropical countries, haven't had the privilege of. We've also had in this region a group of very dedicated and very clever marine ecologists. And they swarm out there in Townsville and they swan out there up and down the reef with gay abandon. But it's really good to have them around, because as a Western country we have an opportunity to have a lot of people looking, in addition to, which I'll talk about a bit later, to a vibrant TO community, traditional owner community, who also want to engage in the reef. So it's a pretty interesting space. We also have, and I haven't heard this mentioned, a bit of breakthrough legislation that came about 40 years ago. And some of us were very young then, but no, we weren't. But what it did say is that we have federal legislation in partnership with the state, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Act, which was back in those days absolutely cut through legislation, and it's provided the basis for us to have very good, very clear management on the GBR. And for that purpose we can only be very thankful that they've been there and they've done such a good job and done some radical things. Rezoning in 2004, you know, a third of the Great Barrier Reef, giving it full protection, was a pretty wild thing back there. And for those of us involved in it, you know, we had stones thrown at us from plenty of directions, but I can say it was a breakthrough piece. And also, all that's provided the necessity, you know, the protection that was necessary for a $4 billion tourist industry. Am I pushing the wrong button? Okay. How? And I know it's really boring to use Steve Jobs one more time, but when we're looking outside the box, we don't have to be completely innovative all the time. Steve Jobs didn't invent anything. What he did was bring things together and put some breakthrough technology together through the iPhone. And interesting after Lena's talk, this is a quote from Steve Jobs down the bottom there, about, are we there yet? When Lena asked that question, he said, well, we really have to do the background work to make sure we're ready to go if we do ever get there. So a bit of prior preparation prevents piss poor performance when we come under pressure, and I think that's where we are right now. And we need to be thinking outside the box for that approach. Oh, I've just done something very bad. Thank you. Okay, a quick case study, and this is a really interesting one, because this is where we did start to think outside the box, and where we've had an opportunity to take it from a new process and drive it all the way down to application and right down to the basis of the industry. So this is actually working. You're going to hear a lot about this in the Crown-of-Thorns session. You're also going to be able to see that some of the information's never hit the deck before, so it's a bit of a buzz for our media in that we're going to put some new information out in that Crown-of-Thorns session. And this was taking a concept in agriculture, which is integrated pest management, and has been trialled out through agriculture for a long time, and saying, can we apply that in a marine environment? And for those who are around in the 80s, 70s and 80s, if you ever saw TV pictures of the plague locusts flying through over the fields and little agricultural planes trying to spray the adult plague locust, zooming up and down. That is a failure of pest management. Nowadays, if we do get even an outbreak or a small outbreak of plague locusts, somebody's messed up in their job. These days, it is controlled by a fungi. Plague locusts, which are an endemic species, are actually controlled by a fungi in the ecotone area near Savannah Deserts area, when conditions are right that they come together to actually aggregate and reproduce into plague numbers. Now, figuring out the criteria for that was really important. Figuring out where they did what in the landscape was very important. Figuring out why they go where they do allowed us to put a full management process in place, and that's in agriculture. Would have that been possible with crown-of-thorns? Okay, a couple of things we learned. Running around just putting adults out of the system doesn't do much to give you control. You know, that's pretty obvious now, but to be perfectly honest, that's what we were doing in our crown-of-thorns approach, starfish approach. We weren't looking at the system, we weren't looking at where the crown-of-thorns were relative to the landscape, we weren't looking at their aggregation criteria. We didn't have those things squared away. Okay, when you start to think of, and this is straight out of agriculture, but when you start to think of the things we actually need for that decision-making process, it changes completely our research agenda. And surprisingly, and this comes down to management capability, management resources, cost benefit as we heard of, and of course social licence. What we needed to know is, when do we consider crown-of-thorns a pest? And once that decision was actually made, that we considered that we needed to actually start to manage it, to protect the reef and build the resilience, then we could kick in with some different thinking. Okay. These are all pretty self-evident. You're not trying to protect everything. Clearly the reef has a number of reefs that are incredibly high value, and they're obviously the tourist reefs that go out to, noting that most tourists go to very small areas of the Great Barrier Reef. The majority of tourism occurs on pontoons and on islands. Now the interesting thing about that, and particularly in the face of the bleaching events that we've had, which have been extremely patchy, you can't drag that many pontoons around to that many different areas, and you also can't drag that many islands around either. They put up a bit of resistance to being dragged around. So you have to look at where and how, what you're actually trying to achieve. I'll cut through this pretty quickly. And they are at major tourism sites in the first instance. Interestingly enough, even after 30 years of what was very, very good discovery research around crown-of-thorns, there was a truckload, a shipload as we say, of things we didn't know, and things that you would have expected us to know. And this means to actually fulfil that role of integrated pest management, we had to go back and learn a whole lot more about this species. And you're going to hear about those in the session. We need to know about the dispersal process. We need to know about the population and life history parameters, why they go where they are. Things don't happen by accident. It's not an accident that crown-of-thorns aggregate in particular areas. It's there for a purpose. We just don't know the secret squirrel reasons for why these things are actually going on. And we had to know about landscape connectivity. Fortunately, a lot of that work's now being done, but we had to go out and redo it. Characteristics of invasion, location and landscape, and that directly, oh, I've done it again, sorry. Look, this takes a special skill to keep knocking this out. Okay. We need a similar model for management dynamics. What's the capability? What's our techniques? What are we currently doing? Can we do it better? Can we do it faster? What are the costs? Distribution of management in time and space. With all these very clever marine scientists and marine ecologists hanging out from Townsville, how do we distribute the skill set across the broader area? And management constraints, dollars. Bucks control everything. You don't have the bucks, you don't have the control. So how do you get those dollars and how do you make them work? And of course, calculating the minimum amount of work you have to do for the minimum amount of dollars to get your outcome is what government wants to really talk to you about. They don't want you to swan in there with big empty pocket asking it to be filled. They're saying, what can you do for the littlest amount of dollars that we're prepared to give you? Oh, I've done it again. I must be pressing this wrong button. Okay, just quickly through this. There was a breakthrough in some technology thanks to James Cook University, where they went from using copper sulfate and various forms to using ox bile stomach, cow stomach ingestion material, and that they had a one-shot kill on crown-of-thorns. They also had an opportunity where we could work back with industry and those who are actually out doing the jobs and get them to start accepting the science on a one-on-one. So instead of doing the science over here and then writing our papers and then trying to deliver it into what's happening in the real world, we did it all at once. Now that's been a big change, and the fact that industry was willing to accept that and move on it very quickly. The other things we did was actually, and everything that we do now, is mainstream traditional owner engagement. And here, instead of it being just simply a crown-of-thorns program where people went out and stabbed the bejesus out of crown-of-thorns, it turned into an actual massive training program. And so we had opportunities for young, unemployed, and particularly young Indigenous players to come in and actually learn skills and capacity. And the one thing that we have found is that particularly kids from up in the north on the Cape, when they come in and start hunting crown-of-thorns, their skill sets leave nearly everyone else's behind. Talk about, you know, being made for the job. Capacity to see disruptions in patterns and things have allowed many of our young Indigenous players to become extremely skilled in this agenda. So we can see that the capacity of traditional owners to engage in protecting the reef, where they have massive skills, can only go up. So it's a big breakthrough for us, both in the social area, but also in actually protecting the reef systems and making it more resilient. So it's a bit of a win-win in that regard. And also gives these guys incredible qualifications when they come out of their training programs, and with 80% pickup in the tourist industry and other marine-based industries. So it's enough to be proud about. So what you're going to hear when you come along to this session tomorrow is, you know, innovations around tactical control. You're going to see how connectivity analysis has enabled better targeting. You're going to see rules of thumb develop for where thresholds, where you stop hunting and you move on to another area. You're going to see the technology around how that's been applied. And you're going to see how looking over the fence at a different industry, utilising a different approach, has made all the difference to controlling one of the large pests on the Great Barrier Reef. So again, this is our time to start looking outside the box and thinking about how other people have done things. We don't have to innovate completely, we can look around. And that's the big takeaway and message of this, is start thinking about how others have done this. Okay, thank you very much.